We are very, very excited tonight to welcome Jessica Valenti. She is a writer, activist, and one of the country's most influential voices on gender and politics, and the award-winning author of 8 books, you all. 8 books. She's busy. After the fall of Roe, though, she founded Abortion Every Day, where she keeps us informed about anything and everything happening with abortion rights in the United States. We're going to drop a link to that Substack in the chat if you are interested in checking it out. I do, and it is very informative, and it always keeps me up to date on the things that I need to know and the things that we're going to talk about tonight. So, welcome, Jessica. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
yeah, so like I and already said, you write the Substack Abortion Every Day. What motivates you to, or what motivated you to
Yeah,
get involved in standing up for abortion rights in this country?
sure. I mean, before Roe was overturned, I had already been writing about abortion rights just in my career as a feminist writer, and I think it's something that's always meant a lot to me. My mom took me to my first pro-choice march when I was 11. We went to DC, and it just made this really incredible impact on me, I think. And so it's always been close to my heart, but I think like a lot of people after Roe was overturned, I was so devastated and so angry and didn't know what to do with all of that anger and devastation. And at the same time, as a writer, I'm sort of watching and watching all the stuff that's happening, seeing how quickly it's happening. And I sort of started writing informally. I already had a Substack going on where I wrote columns, and I just was sort of bitching a little bit every day. And then after a couple of weeks, I realized I'm actually covering this every day, and there's enough to write about every single day, probably every single hour if I wanted to. And so that's how Abortion Every Day was born. And since then, it's sort of become a place where I'm trying to provide a little bit of order to the chaos. I think anyone who cares about politics and this issue knows that there really is so much like just so much horror, and the attacks are just constant, and we're being inundated. And I think a lot of people who care about this issue don't know what to do, and they don't know what to pay attention to. And so the hope is to make that a little bit easier for folks so that they can come and they can read one email a day, feel like they have a grasp on what's happening, feel like they can sort of connect the through lines, connect the dots, see what's coming next. And so it's a hard thing to write about every day, but I feel really lucky to feel like I have a hold, like I have a little bit of an idea of what's happening, and also like I can help articulate some of this stuff for people.
Thank you for that. And I do want to point out to everybody watching that Jessica and I did not coordinate our outfits. This was just a happy coincidence that we were both wearing this color tonight. You've already mentioned that you've been tracking and writing about abortion rights for many, many years. How would you compare the landscape now to even just a few years ago?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's both that on our side, like the pro-choice movement is so much more powerful, so much louder. I think the support for abortion rights, which has always been really, really strong, has gone up even further, right? Like we're at a point now where 81% of Americans do not want government involvement in abortion at all. That's a tremendous number. That's a really, really popular issue. But on the other side, they are getting even more emboldened, right? Despite that popularity, despite how overwhelmingly pro-choice the country is, we're seeing sort of like dual things happen where Republicans, mainstream Republicans who know that this is a really popular issue, are trying to cover up their extremism by using certain kinds of language, by framing it as something that they're doing to protect women. But at the same time, there is this rising sort of extremist tide that's coming along with it that is much more explicit, much less afraid to talk about their desire to punish women, arrest women, give women the death penalty for abortion. And so both of those things are happening side by side. And it's really important to me when I'm writing the newsletter and when I'm talking about this issue that I'm pointing out that this is the same group of people, right? Like they're saying one thing and they have their sort of like press friendly talking points, but this is all part of the same movement.
So we all obviously heard and felt and read when the Dobbs decision came down. And I think a lot of people got very involved. I mean, I live in Ohio, we passed issue one, so people were like very on top of this and paying attention. But there is so much going on right now. So can you share some of the like less obvious or underreported ways that state
Yeah.
legislatures are really trying to undermine abortion rights right now?
Yeah. It's so hard because there's so much. So I'll tell you a little bit about the stuff I've been covering recently because there really is something new just constantly. There is a new legislative trend called Baby Olivia bills. And maybe some of you have this in your state, where essentially they're passing legislation that mandates public schools to show anti-abortion propaganda videos disguised as a science lesson, disguised as a lesson on fetal development. And in some states, they are actually requiring that it is in science classes rather than sex ed classes, because whereas you can opt your kid out of sex ed classes, you can't opt them out of science class, right? And these are being passed across the country, and they are part of this much broader sort of national strategy to change educational guidelines around fetal development in every single state. This is something I have not seen covered in a big way, right? Like you'll see coverage in individual states, but there's not, again, that sort of like through line connection. The other sort of sneaky legislation that I've been tracking is something that the anti-abortion movement is calling clean water bills. And what these are they want states to look for evidence of abortion medication and birth control and hormones that could be associated with gender-affirming care in the wastewater. And that is to surveil sort of like what is happening in a community, how much birth control, how much abortion medication people are taking. But it's also a way for them to make this argument that abortion medication and birth control is bad for the environment. And that's why we need to restrict it. It's not that they're against birth control, they want to protect the environment. And so that's another like really, really sneaky piece of legislation. Again, they're calling it clean water legislation. Who doesn't like clean water legislation? Not seeing it get a tremendous amount of media attention. And then the last thing I just want to mention is something I sort of hinted at earlier, which is this group of people who really wants to see abortion patients punished, and they want to see them punished with homicide charges. And these are called equal protection bills. And since January, there have been, I think, 12 or 13 states that have considered equal protection bills. And basically, these say that if you have an abortion, you can be charged with homicide. In a lot of these states, that can mean the death penalty. And whereas these sorts of bills and the people who are bringing them used to be treated as radical outliers, like we have nothing to do with them, that's not the mainstream Republican Party, they're getting a lot more attention. They're getting a whole lot more co-sponsors. They're starting to get committee hearings, right? Like committee meetings where they never had that before. I'm really, really concerned about that. And I'm really concerned about the way that this particular group of anti-abortion activists, they call themselves abortion abolitionists, they are infiltrating state legislatures, they're getting themselves elected. And again, it's one of these things where I've seen maybe one or two big national pieces on this, not a tremendous amount at all. And they're really the power that they have is really like very quickly growing.
Okay, I want to kind of ask this question. You kind of mentioned it by talking about people getting elected, who are kind of in these
Yeah.
extremist positions, but I just want to put a fine point on it. You said that these were people who not long ago were just like kind of pushed, like, yeah, no, we're not engaging with you. How did they go from an outlier that nobody wanted to talk to suddenly being heard, legislation being actually
Yeah.
introduced in state legislatures? Like, what shifted? Might be obvious the
Yeah.
answer, but I just want to put a fine point on it.
No, it's a great question. I think in part it's just this emboldening from Trump being reelected where they feel a little bit immune to consequences. I think that they just feel empowered to say what they want to say. And in part, it's also that this group of people, these abortion abolitionists, have been doing behind the scenes lobbying work for years, for a really long time, right? Um, even though they haven't had any bills passed, for example, in Texas, they lobbied the Texas GOP for years to include this notion of equal protection in the Republican Party platform in the state. And they did. So Texas Republicans will say, we don't want to punish women, we don't want to punish abortion patients, we're not interested in that. They adopted that language into the Republican Party platform of Texas. And so there is just a lot of slow, methodical, local lobbying work that's happening, right? Where they're very, very good at working on individual legislators, going to like individual lawmakers and just changing their minds.
So I also want to ask this question because you're saying like these things are flying under the radar, and then also, things that like clean water sound good. So
Yeah.
for people who are on this call, I know there's other language that they've kind of adopted to
Yeah.
make things sound much better than they are. And I think one of them you write about is protection for women.
Yeah.
Can you kind of share what that's all about? And then also maybe some of the other like terminology that they're using that is definitely meant to cause confusion.
Yeah. So protection has been a big one for a long time, where the idea is to make it sound as if we're not trying to control or punish women. We're just trying to look out for you, right? That's why even before Roe was overturned, when they would try to pass mandatory ultrasounds, mandatory waiting periods, they would call it women's right to know, right? We're just making sure you're fully informed. This is informed consent. Now, the biggest sort of protection legislation that they're trying to pass is trafficking, what they're calling an anti-trafficking effort, right? They're targeting this primarily at teenagers, where they're saying if you bring a teenager out of state for an abortion, that is abortion trafficking and that is a felony. We've seen these laws passed in Idaho, Tennessee. There's a couple of other states considering it. But essentially, what it is a travel ban on teenagers, right? Because what they're saying is if, an aunt, an older sister, like if someone brings you out of state, or even if someone helps you to get abortion medication in state, that is considered trafficking. And so essentially, they're trying to eradicate community support for young people. And that sort of focus on young people is something that you see a lot. You see it with like language around parental rights, but the trafficking in particular is just really just so beyond the pale to me that they use this language, and that they pretend, like in Tennessee, for example, right around the same time that they passed this anti-trafficking legislation, they also took a vote where every single Republican House member refused to pass an exception for rape victims under 13. So rape victims 12 and under, they like put it on the record, voted, no, that's forced pregnancy for you. But we're protecting children by passing this anti-trafficking law, right? Like it's the hypocrisy is just so out of control, and so out of pocket. And then there's one more protection sort of trend that I think is worth mentioning, because it's also one of those legislative trends that flies under the radar, and that's abortion reporting, where I think in Ohio actually right now they're trying to push for something like this, where they want to expand how the state collects data on abortions, and they want to make that data public so that anti-abortion groups can sort of scour through it and look for evidence of supposed wrongdoing and then use that to sue abortion providers, right? And in part, that's a chilling effect also. They're saying, we just want this data because we want to protect women. We want to make sure abortion is safe. This is how we collect all the information and make sure everything's cool. But in reality, you're going to be a lot less likely to seek out care if you know that your doctor is taking down all of your information, asking you questions like, why are you getting this abortion? How many live children do you have? Right? Like there's this sort of like intimidation factor that is built into a lot of this legislation, but especially the protection, that reporting bit.
Yeah, and actually, you're right. It is Ohio, and we've been
Yeah.
talking about them flying under the radar. I live here. I've lived here for almost my entire life, and I had not heard of that till I read your Substack. And I was literally like telling Red, White, and Blue staff, "Oh my God, did you see this?" So, and I think the other thing you pointed out was just like, if you live in a rural area, a small community, you can
Yes.
use that data. It's going to be kind of easy to identify the people in these communities. So it's really not protecting women at all. Can
No.
you talk though a little bit, like I said, things are flying under the radar and it's just not
Yeah.
being covered in the media. Like why isn't it being covered in the media? Or Is it
Yeah.
being covered in particular states where it's happening and just not getting national attention, or is it really just not getting attention?
I mean, in part, it's really not getting attention. Like, I think the most obvious gap recently is, and hopefully a lot of you have heard about this, but a young woman in Georgia was arrested for her miscarriage, like I think 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago. There was not one bit of national press on this story. You're talking about someone being arrested for a miscarriage. That is mind-blowing to me, and somehow that did not warrant um, coverage from the Times, from the Post, like nothing. There is part of me that is like, I understand, and we have a lot of great reporters, and certainly political reporters are incredibly overwhelmed right now, right? Like, I get that. But part of the issue is that we have never had a lot of special journalistic attention paid to abortion and reproductive rights in particular. And so when Roe was overturned, journalism was not prepared for this moment. And so you have a lot of generalist political reporters, generalist health reporters writing about this issue, and a lot of them are great. But if you don't know the background, if you don't know the context, if you don't know the players of the anti-abortion movement, if you don't know the language, it's going to be a lot harder for you to accurately report on these issues. And so in part, I think it's an issue of we just don't have enough abortion reporters. We're not sort of like raising up the next generation of abortion reporters. And we're not teaching newsrooms how to really like accurately and fully report on the issue.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm just going to again go
Yeah.
back to it. Fetal personhood laws, fetal rights legislation. Can you explain what that entails and I guess the impact that that would have on abortion rights?
Yeah, I mean, fetal personhood is sort of like end game for them, right? Where the entire point for them is to make fetuses, embryos, fertilized eggs, a constitutional person. And there's already fetal personhood laws on the books in some states. And one of the main ways they're trying to sort of codify this idea of fetal personhood is not by saying a fetus is a person, right? It's again like back to this sort of like sneaky language, sneaky legislation, where in Kansas, for example, I think it was Kansas, um, they were trying to pass a bill, and they may have passed it, that said you have to start paying child support upon conception, right? So it's another one of those things where they're trying to make it sound like this is good for women, this is protecting women, this is helping women and families. But in reality, the idea is to codify this idea of fetal personhood. In Nebraska, they are pushing forward a bill that would require abortion providers to have a burial or cremation of fetal remains. That's another one where they're trying to say, this is a person and they're deserving of, a certain kind of send off. And so there's all of these like little ways where they're trying to just implement fetal personhood all over the place. And fetal personhood is one of the main ways that we see people get arrested, right? Like that's how people get criminalized is through this idea of fetal personhood. In Alabama, for example, they use fetal personhood to sort of like preemptively arrest and jail pregnant women who are suspected of using drugs. So if they think that you're using marijuana and they find out that you're pregnant, they'll put you in jail to protect your fetus, right? Like the idea is like that's a person, this is child abuse or potential child abuse, and so we're going to jail you now in order to protect that child. So all of which is to say, this is happening already in a lot of states. And I think it would really behoove a lot of us, especially those of us in pro-choice states, to understand that that is not going to stay there, right? Like these are testing grounds. These are testing grounds for the rest of the country. This is what they want everywhere. And so much of what they're doing with all of this sneaky language and sneaky legislation is trying to figure out the stuff that's going to stick, the stuff that's going to work, and the stuff that won't raise people's suspicion and won't cause a lot of community and voter backlash. And that's why I'm just, constantly raising the alarm and telling people we have to like cause a fuss about every single one of these things, right? Like all of it is important, all of it needs our attention, all of it needs our voices, because that is how they're going to decide what to export everywhere.
Yeah, definitely the testing grounds. certain states. My state is one of them. Um, so speaking of that, I'm curious about local action. So
Yeah.
I had the distinct honor of living in a city where they passed a local abortion ban. We organized and we actually did get it taken away. So, but I'm curious because we hear a lot about potential national abortion ban, and then we hear about some of these state legislatures. Are we seeing any type of local effort, or is that kind of fallen by the wayside?
No, it's still there. Was the one in your town the sanctuary cities type of?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're doing this everywhere. They're doing this everywhere. And it is unfortunately really smart, and they're doing it for a couple of reasons. The first is so that if they pass an ordinance that is so obviously unconstitutional, right? In Ohio, you have protection for abortion rights in your state constitution. If they pass an abortion ban locally, then obviously that's going to cause a fight. They want that fight to go all the way to the Supreme Court, right? Like they are trying to get it all the way to the Supreme Court. The other reason that they're trying to do this is they're trying to sort of implement these chilling effects where people feel too afraid to help each other. So a lot of the local abortion bans are the trafficking things that I mentioned, where in Texas, for example, I think it's 6 or 7 counties at this point have an anti-trafficking ordinance that isn't just targeted at teens, but is targeted at people of any age. If you help them leave the state using those county roads to get an abortion, you are a trafficker. And the point there is to, and that's not criminal, by the way, right? Because it's a local ordinance. It's that someone can sue you. Someone can sue you and keep you in court, forever. The point there is to make it so that community members don't want to help each other, that individual patients feel stripped of that community support, where they're like, I'm not going to ask my friend for gas money because all of a sudden she's going to be a trafficker and that's not fair to her. I can't have my husband take me across state lines because that puts him in legal jeopardy. And that to me is so transparent of who they are, this group of people who, talks about themselves as, the party of family values. And meanwhile, they're incentivizing, community members turning on each other, turning each other in. They are trying to isolate patients. They are trying to isolate people who need the most help. And so no, I think that the local level stuff is really, really a tremendous strategy for them. In the same way, right, that like they're trying to make sure that crisis pregnancy centers are everywhere locally. Like that's their local enforcement arm. They have those places there so that they can like just be in every single community possible.
Yeah. And they're everywhere, and many states are even funding those, which I don't think a lot of
Many,
people understand their tax dollars are going
many.
to that. Um, are there federal level efforts underway? I know we all hear about threats of a national abortion ban, but
Yeah.
even in non-legislative actions, like there's a lot of chatter about using the Comstock Act. So
Yeah.
I guess what are you hearing at like the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, with the Comstock Act, which is, a federal 150-year-old obscenity law that makes it illegal to mail or ship obscene material, and in this case, Republicans would define that as, abortion pills. They could even say birth control, any tools used in abortions. And if they were to enforce the Comstock Act, that would mean devastation really for abortion access across the country because so many people across the country are having abortion medication shipped to them, right? It's 1 in 5 American abortions right now are being used, are being done via telehealth. And so if they enforce the Comstock Act, they would be able to essentially arrest people on federal charges for shipping abortion pills. They haven't done anything on it yet, and we're sort of like those of us in the movement are just waiting, right? Like we don't know which way they're going to go, and in part we think maybe that sort of anticipation and anxiety is part of the point. In the meantime, though, there is other stuff that they can do, and something I've been writing about just this week is the attacks on mifepristone, which is one of the two drugs that you take when you have a medication abortion. They are, I think, gearing up very, very clearly to roll back access of abortion medication nationally and to have the FDA rescind certain kinds of access and rescind certain kinds of approval. Again, to do away with telehealth, to make it harder for teenagers to get abortion medication, and basically to devastate that sort of like form of access that we have. And so I think that is probably the next big thing that we're going to see. And I would be remiss, I always say this when I'm talking about abortion medication, you don't have to be pregnant or like to get abortion medication right now, right? You don't need to be pregnant and need an abortion to get abortion medication right now. If you think you might need it someday, or your kid or your grandkid might need it someday, order it now. It's called advanced provision. I have a lot of resources on my website. I have 5 doses of abortion medication in my medicine cabinet. Should like my daughter need it one day? Should I need it one day? I'm almost past that point, but it makes me feel better knowing that I have this and knowing that I have this for my community and the people who count on me in my home. And so really, really recommend, especially now, that if you can do this, if you can order advanced provision abortion medication, you absolutely should.
That's actually good to know. I mean, I have daughters of that age, college, just out of college, so for sure I've been hearing and talking to friends about that a lot. Are there signs that anti-abortion groups have shifted their tactics at all after the
Mm.
Dobbs decision?
I mean, I think that they are further emboldened. Um, and I think that they have a lot more money, unfortunately. Like, I'm going to be writing about this at the newsletter soon, but basically, there are a couple of billionaires who are pouring a whole lot of money into this movement right now, both for the work that they're doing on the national level and for the work that they're doing on that local level, through crisis pregnancy centers, through those local ordinances, through trying to increase criminalization, through equal protection bills. Like, they are taking, like, they're doing it all, right? Like, they are not really focusing on any one thing. They are like throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks. We're going to try everything. We have all this money, and so let's do it all. And I think is, and that in itself is a strategy where they're inundating us. They're doing so much. It feels impossible to keep up. It feels impossible to know what they're up to next. And so I think that in itself is a strategy to try to sort of like keep us on our heels, right?
Yep, for sure. Someone had sent me a direct message to ask you this question, and it was if you want to learn more, read her Substack today. But you were talking about the mifepristone and that Trump administration is actually in court defending it.
Yeah.
And this is again that like you need to know what's actually going on, and which is why it's so important that you all are here on this call and learning all
Mhm.
these tactics and tricks so that when your friends bring this up, you can correct them. But can you tell us about whether Trump is really defending mifepristone right now?
No, 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 no. All the headlines say he is. And so if you didn't know any better, you would absolutely think that he is. So essentially, when Biden was president, um, 3 Republican-led states, Idaho, Missouri, and Kansas, um, basically sued the FDA over mifepristone rules. And they said mifepristone's dangerous. You got to rescind these approvals. You have to roll back access to it. The assumption was that once Trump took office, his Department of Justice was not going to keep up the same fight that the Biden administration did, right? Because Trump administration is anti-abortion. And so everyone was very, very surprised when yesterday the Department of Justice asked the court to dismiss this suit against the FDA. And so we ended up with all these headlines saying, oh, look, they're defending abortion medication. But that's not what's going on. They didn't ask the court to dismiss based on the merits. So they didn't say mifepristone is safe. What do you mean? And you're using junk science, and this suit should be dismissed because, they're full of shit. Instead, they asked that the suit be dismissed on standing, meaning they want the court to say these 3 states don't have the authority, don't have the right to bring a legal challenge against the FDA's regulations. And they're doing that for a very specific reason, because when their FDA, Trump's FDA, goes to restrict abortion medication, goes to ban abortion medication, they want a legal precedent that says states can't interfere with that. So that way, pro-choice states won't be able to bring a legal challenge. It'll make it that much harder for pro-choice states to sue when the FDA inevitably, I think, implements these restrictions. It's
Yeah.
just it's and they're so smart because they knew that this was going to get them positive headlines, right? They know that abortion is incredibly, incredibly popular. And so they knew that by doing this, it would set off this sort of like flurry of headlines saying abortion, Trump is, defending abortion medication, but that they don't have to refute this junk science and these lies about mifeprstone's safety.
A few more things though. So, how are attacks on abortion rights intersecting with attacks on trans rights, birth control, IVF? What's going on there?
I mean, they're all very much related. They're all interconnected, to the point that in some places they're the same law, right? Like in Nebraska, the state's abortion ban is also a ban on gender affirming care for minors. And which is so interesting to me because I think so often, um, too often pro-choicers will separate those issues out, but they're very much the same, right? Like they want control over people's bodies. They want to reinforce traditional gender roles, reinforce the traditional gender binary, um, just bring it back to that like old school white Christian male control. And so to them, it's all the same thing. And it's very, very similar with birth control and with IVF as well. With birth control, this is something I've written a lot about at the newsletter. There were years into their attack on birth control, right? Like this is already happening. This is not something that's like happening in the future. It's happening now. For years, they've been laying the groundwork to argue that certain kinds of birth control, like emergency contraception and IUDs, are actually not birth control at all, but are abortions. And they have codified those fake definitions into legislation and into different court cases all over the place so that they can slowly start to chip away at access to contraception in the same way that they chipped away at access to abortion. And with IVF, we're seeing something very, very similar. Whereas a lot of you probably remember trap laws, we still have them in a lot of states. These are the laws, even in pro-choice states, that say, an abortion clinic needs to have a hallway this wide, and doctors need to have hospital admitting privileges, and you need to report things in a certain way. They want to do the same thing with IVF clinics so that they can say, we're not trying to ban IVF. We just want them to write like, 10 different pages on each frozen embryo to essentially make it impossible for them to operate. Um, and again, it just comes back to the point that like the people who are running this movement, and this really is like a small group of people, right? It's like a minority, but a very extremist, powerful minority. Um, they have really narrow and specific ideas about what gender roles should be, what family means, how people should have kids. It's exactly what you think it is.
Um, okay, so what are some concrete ways that all of us on this call tonight can, who are obviously probably feeling alarmed by everything we've been discussing
Yeah,
here,
sorry. No one
maybe
likes to
feeling
have
a
me
little
at a party.
overwhelmed. How can people plug in and make a difference?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one most important thing, and this is self-serving in a way, but like make sure you know what's going on, right? Like not just nationally, make sure you know what's going on in your community, not just state laws, but like find out what is happening at your kid's school, find out what your local pharmacy's policies are on carrying abortion medication, find out what your local hospital does. If you live in a state with an abortion ban, is there a hospital committee that decides who qualifies for an exception, a health exception, right? Like anything that you can do to like really tap into those like small local decisions, rulings, committees, boards, all of that really matters because that is tangibly what is going to impact your community's lives the most. I also think raising the alarm among your friends and holding media to account. And again, not just national media, but like your local paper, your state paper. One of the things I try to do with the newsletter is share a lot of this language that I'm talking about here so that when someone in, whatever state, whatever town sees a word used in the newspaper or sees a certain kind of term used in some legislation, that they can raise the alarm, that they can write a letter to the editor and say, this is actually what this means, or so that they can alert their local lawmaker and say, actually, this is what this means, just to be as educated as possible. Because the truth is, they're not hiding it all that well. Like everything they're doing is very sneaky, but once you know the language, it's like you have like a key unlocked. Do you know what I mean? And you really will be able to, like, once you learn these words, once you know what to look out for, you will see it everywhere. You will know exactly what's going on. And for me, there is something very empowering, and in a moment when everything feels out of control, it makes me feel like I'm in a lot more control and I can see exactly what's happening when you know what to look for. And so I think knowing what to look for and honing in locally is the best advice I could give.
Okay, and what I'm going to ask for all of you on this call tonight, Nicole, if you don't mind dropping the link again to our Reality of Project 2025, I'm going to share my screen really quick, just to show you all that this is on our website. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen. This is our Project 2025 tracker. And if you scroll down, you're going to see, we can see all the different issues here, but we're going to go reproductive rights. And you can see that's really telling you how things are being implemented. You can share this. What we would love for you to do, like like Jessica was just saying, we really need you to be spreading the word to your friends. If you scroll down to the bottom of this web page, we have ready-made social media posts that you all can share. All you have to do is just click to share on Facebook or make your decision as to where you want to, share. All of these you can share out with your friends and they can come and they can track and see what is going on. So this is one of the ways we can really spread the word. Okay, before we get to questions from the audience, I just want to say, you track the news very closely. There's obviously a lot of things to track. You produce a newsletter every single day. You just published a book last year. How do you keep up with everything?
I don't. I definitely do not keep up with everything. I'm definitely overwhelmed. I think anyone who works on this issue, I mean, anyone who works in politics right now, but anyone who works on this issue in particular is overwhelmed and struggling. And, it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. This is really, really challenging work, but um, you know, I have a really supportive family. I love the community that like we've sort of developed over at Abortion Every Day. I love coming to talk to communities like this one where people are so engaged and involved and active. It brings me a lot of hope. It makes me feel like, okay, we can absolutely do this. Um, and for me, that's everything. Like the I can make more hours in the day somehow, so long as I feel like there are other people who are doing something similar alongside me, you know?
Yep, absolutely. We all need more hours in the day. That
Yeah.
goes without saying. So we've given a lot of overwhelming information here tonight, which is so important to be educated, and that is like it's great that so many people are on here to share this. But what is giving you hope right now? Let's kind of end this on a positive note, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
I'll tell a story. I've told this before. I might have written about it at the Substack, but a few months ago, right after, I guess it wasn't a few months ago, it was almost a year ago. It was like a month or two after Florida had passed its 6-week abortion ban. I went down to Florida to do a tour of abortion clinics and to speak to some of the activists there who at the time were working on Amendment 4. And I had this particular tour of a clinic. And because the 6-week abortion ban had just passed, it was very, very empty. Like the clinic manager was taking us through the building and we're in the waiting room. No one's there. She takes us to the exam room. Obviously, no one is there. And she sort of leads us all the way to the back of the building where there's this really, really small room, no windows. But in that room, there were about a dozen or more women, mostly young women, all wearing headsets, all, sorry, booking bus tickets, you know, making appointments for people out of state. One person was texting emotional support to a woman who had never been on a plane before. And it just was one of these moments that reminded me no matter what is happening in every single state, in every single community, there are rooms like that one, rooms full of mostly women, but lots of activists who are working their asses off to make sure that if someone needs care, they're going to get it. And knowing that that level of support and passion for this issue is what gives me hope.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm gonna bring Bridget up now because I know she's been recording questions in the chat. So I'm gonna leave you two to go through those questions, and I'll come back in about 15 minutes so we can say goodnight.
Thank you for all your great information, Jessica. I appreciate all of this. There's been a lot of questions about language and what language to use. People have suggested, kind of in response to some of those questions, that you've got a lot of great resources, but someone suggested a cheat sheet. So just wondered if you had any
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yes, I am working on that. I am working on a cheat sheet. I do have I did a video collaboration with a group called The Meteor, where we did a video series called Anti-Abortion Glossary, where I sort of go through a lot of these terms. And I can, when you all send your email out, I can send you some of those videos. But I'm working on like a literal document with all of that. And I'm also going to be doing another, like a season 2 of that video series with legislative trends, anti-abortion legislative trends, so that people will know what to look out for with, the baby Olivia bills, with the clean water bills, and just the kind of language that they should be keeping an eye out for when they see a reproductive rights related bill. So yes, like definitely on it.
Awesome. Thank you. Not a surprise that you're on top of that. Um, Another question kind of related to what some of what you were just talking about is that idea, some of these pro-birth laws that are coming up and that topic coming up. Someone just kind of asked, aside from religious beliefs, what are other reasons that, we're hearing this pro-birth stuff and things, contraception and abortion bans. What are some other reasons behind those?
Yeah, I mean, outside of the religious stuff, I do really think it's just a concerted effort to eradicate women specifically from public life to force us back into the domestic sphere. Like what better way to financially devastate a person and make it impossible for them to participate in politics, work in the formal sphere, than to ensure that they are forever pregnant, right? Like that is a fantastic way to financially devastate someone, to make sure that they can't leave home. To me, that's the number one thing. Like they do not want us in the public sphere, politically, work-wise, any of it. They want us weak and dependent. And so to me, like once you understand that that's what this is about, everything becomes so much clearer. I will get a lot of questions, especially when um, there's all of these like the laws that don't have exceptions for fatal fetal abnormalities, right? So in Texas, for example, you can't get an abortion even if you're pregnant with a fetus that is never going to survive. And so people will ask me, like, that's nuts. How does that even make sense if this fetus is not going to survive? Like, what is the point there? And the point is to bring the pregnant person down, to give personhood to the fetus, embryo, fertilized egg first, and to make sure that pregnant person is a second-class citizen.
Well, and that just listening to you talk takes me back to times I've had multiple friends who have been in situations like you're talking about. And it was luckily, it was for them years ago before a lot of these laws had changed. But I've thought many times about them and how they could have ended up like so many of these women in the
Yep.
news. So
Yep.
that was another question kind of that came up for somebody was by someone was what can we do to be able to support people in our lives or in our communities if they end up having an abortion or they're
Yep.
struggling with any of this, what can we do?
I think making sure that the people in your lives and in your communities, even your extended communities, know that you are there for them, know that you're a person that they can go to if they need abortion medication, if they need advice on where to go get an abortion, right? Again, like so much of what Republicans are trying to do right now and the anti-abortion movement is trying to do right now is to cut off that community support and to make people too afraid to help each other. So if you can make it clear, not even like among friends and family, but like on Facebook in your extended community, like make clear that you will be there for people if you ever need help. Like I'm here, I have these resources. Like be a person who your extended community knows, okay, if I need something, I know that they have resources. I know that that's someone I can go to that I can trust. I think that that is a tremendous gift to give to your community.
Well, I love that you say that. And I remember I've got a daughter who's about to turn 24. And I remember when the Dobbs decision came down, she was, she was sending me these texts of my friends and I were talking about this. Should we be doing this? Should we be
Yeah.
doing that? And so I think I know in the chat there was a little bit of confusion about what we should be stocking up on and how easy it is. I saw the resources page on your Substack, so I did link that. But what else is there kind of a quick clarification you could give us on that medication portion?
Sure. So, abortion medication, you can get it in advance. It's called advance provision. You can go to places like Aid Access or Plan C pills. You don't need to be pregnant. You can order it ahead of time just to have in your medicine cabinet just in case, right? I'm not going to legally tell you to give out abortion medication to other people, right? I can't do that, and I don't know your laws, and I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but I can say that is my plan. That is my plan is to have abortion medication on hand in case I need it or someone that I know needs it. Abortion medication has a shelf life of 2 to 5 years. I think for mifepristone, it's 2 to 3 years. For misoprostol, which is the second drug, it's about 5 years. There is no weight limit. I get a lot of questions about weight limit because there is a weight limit with emergency contraception. There is not with abortion medication. Um, and the other important thing to know is if you don't want to order advanced provision, if you don't want to have abortion medication on hand, um, there are groups and communities and people in every single state who can help should you ever need it.
And I think some of those are listed on your resources page as well. I think I saw that. Okay, great.
Yes, and I also have listed on my resources page legal groups if you're ever concerned about criminalization, if you are ever worried that like about the law. I have a couple of toll-free numbers for le free legal advice, and I have a number for a group called the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline. So if you or anyone you know is ever self-managing an abortion and you don't want to go to the hospital or you don't know if you should go to the hospital, there are nurses and doctors who are on that line who can help.
I think that's a great point because, like the story about the woman in Georgia, the stories we hear about doctors who are leaving,
Yeah.
obstetrics because of fear between, about treatment and things like that. So that's good
Yeah.
advice there. I think other people are just kind of talking about in the chat, what's some of the overwhelming reasons why these bans on abortion and contraception are so important to politicians and or the idea that someone suggested you should run for office, and that we need women and especially pro-choice women, more pro-choice women to run for office. So
Yeah.
any thoughts on just that idea of, there's so much more behind this aside from just the medical part of it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it gets back again to this idea of public life, right? And wanting to make sure that women stay in public life. Yeah, we need more pro-choice politicians. We need more politicians who understand the gravity of the situation. And I would also say it's not even just like local legislators. It's not just state lawmakers. We need, and I know you all know this, but like we need pro-choice people on school boards because they are really infiltrating schools in this major, major way. Like we need people on school boards. We need people on hospital boards. Um, all of it. It all matters. We need people in newsrooms who understand this issue. There are so many different ways that you can help. As a public servant or as just a person in the private sphere, like tremendous.
Well, and I think that goes to a point someone made in the chat about, you hear these numbers all the time that 80% of people support a woman's right to choose, but
Yeah.
yet we're here with all these laws, right? So,
Yeah. This is why I focus so much on language and the importance of accurate media coverage, because too often, if you were to just go by media headlines, you would think that the country is split on abortion rights, right? You would think that like, oh, this is a controversial issue. This country is very like split down the middle on abortion rights. That is not true. That has not been true for decades, and it is especially not true now. This is about a small group of extremist legislators imposing their will on the vast majority of voters. And we need to make sure that it's covered as such, right? That like I think too often media outlets have this fear of being seen as biased, and so they do that like both sides media thing um, in a way that is actually not serving the truth. And I think it's so important that we are making sure that it's not just politics, but culture we're paying attention to, and that the culture reflects the truth of how incredibly, incredibly popular abortion rights are.
well, I know that lately one thing I've been so grateful for is that Substack did kind of launch before we got to this time period that
Yep.
we're in right now, because
Yep.
having access to resources, to your writing, to so many other great, talented writers is, to me, that's a gift right now to be able to give us a little bit of sanity in this never-ending news cycle, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I think that's it, Julie.
Yeah, no, I actually did see a couple I was gonna bring up. I'm sorry. Now I'm scrolling back.
There's one asking about, is there a national coalition or think tank putting together bigger strategy about women's rights? And
I mean, there are a lot of great national groups, right? Like Reproductive Freedom for All and Planned Parenthood, of course. There are a couple of like less well-known but really important groups that I think are sort of like on the cutting edge, like Pregnancy Justice, which is a group that focuses on pregnancy criminalization, but they've sort of been ahead of the curve on fetal personhood for a really long time. They're worth absolutely checking out. Groups like Medical Students for Choice, If, When, How, who are working with medical students, doctors, legal students. All of those groups I think are fantastic. Um, there's there's a lot. I wish that we had, I guess if there was anything I wish that we had strategically that I feel like we don't have now, it is a more robust sort of left-wing social media ecosystem. Conservatives in the anti-abortion movement are very, very good at um, raising up young conservative voices online. We are not as good at doing that. And we're certainly not as good at doing that when it comes to pro-choice voices. And so if anyone is out there who knows an organization or who wants to start that organization, I think that that's one of the best things that we can do right now is try to um, sort of cultivate that next generation of activists, that next generation of social media voices.
I think that's a great suggestion, especially considering the data that we kind of have seen from the past election and where people are getting their information, especially those young men. So I think that's a great
Exactly.
suggestion. Anything else, Julie, that you saw pop up?
No, the only thing I just love the fact that you talked about how it's important that people are on school board, and someone did ask about like, what do we do about these people being recruited who are with these very extreme positions? Well, you know what you do is you show up in those elections and you talk to your friends about the candidates, and because they use the language that Jessica's talking about, they make everything sound really pretty, and you need to be the one in your community to actually expose that and to share that information. So that is why it's so important. I'm going to drop again in the chat the link to our Project 2025 tracker and also to Jessica's Substack. I'm also going to drop the link to our Trouble Nation program, which is our local organizing program. If you want to start a local group, if you want to get ready for your school boards, your city councils, every local race that's coming up this year, we can help you do that. And that, honestly, these elections are won by very few votes sometimes. So you getting organized exposing a candidates who are extreme, you actually can make a huge impact in your community. So thank you all so much for coming. This has been an amazing crowd, great questions. And thank you so much to Jessica for coming and sharing with us, and then for all the work that you're doing just to keep us informed. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, everybody have a good night, and hopefully we'll see you soon at another event. Good night,
Good
all.
night.